able to see that you've raised your hand, and that I will call on you. Shirley, just testing it out. Just testing it out. Fantastic. I saw this funny thing shortly after Zoom became prolific, and apparently there was a kid in a college lecture class on Zoom, and he raised his hand in the chat, and the professor called on him, and he said, "Oh, sorry, I was just stretching." Okay, so a little bit of background on the book of Ruth, and kind of naming what we're doing. I am using the JPS commentary on the book of Ruth. It is edited with commentary by Firmer Kinsey and Tamar Eskenazi. You may recognize one of those names, Eskenazi. She was the co-editor of Torah, a Women's Commentary, also published by that was published by URJ Press, and she is a co-editor on this as well. And she also taught me the Book of Ruth. So I had her for our Ketuvim class. And so that's the text that I'm going to be using. I want to encourage you to use whatever text you are comfortable with. If you have a text, great. If not, in the chat, I just dropped in the webpage for Sepharia, which is, or Sepharia, and that is an incredible Jewish source website. And if you copy and paste the link into your browser, you can't click on it and send you there because of Zoom security features. But if you copy and paste, you will be able to go there. Yes, Eileen.
If you're updated to the latest version of Zoom on your computer, you can click the link. There's been an upgrade.
Fabulous.
If you are on the latest version, it may look like a blue link with a line underneath, and click away. If not, copy and paste.
Cool. Thank you. So this is the text we're going to be using. And it's important for us to understand where this book sits in the context of the Jewish canon. So the book of Ruth comes in the Ketuvim section. So our Hebrew Bible is made up of 3 sections. Torah, which we study endlessly. Hopefully we study all of these endlessly. But Torah, Nevi'im, which is the prophets, the prophetic works. So Joshua, Isaiah, Kings, etc., etc. And then you've got the Ketuvim, which includes the book of Psalms, Esther, Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, as well as the book of Ruth. There is a custom of associating each Megillah with a particular holiday. So there are classically known, there are 6 Megillot there, and the 6th one is Jonah, and we associate Jonah with the High Holy Days, and that's all we need to say about that. But if we think about the other 5 Megillot, each of them is connected to a holiday and studied on that holiday. Pesach, we have Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. Now you notice I started with Pesach and not Rosh Hashanah, which would lead us to Yom Kippur and so on. That's because in the Torah, Pesach is the first holiday. It's the first major holiday because Aviv, the month of spring, now we call it Nisan, is the beginning of the year. It's the spring. It's the new year. So Pesach, we study Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. On Shavuot, which is coming up very shortly, we study the book of Ruth. Tisha B'Av, we study the book of Eicha, Lamentations. Sukkot, we study Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes. A time for this and a time for that. A time to sing the, oh my goodness. Why am I blanking on his name? The folk singer. Pete Seeger. There's a time to sing the Pete Seeger version. There's a time to sing the Birds version. And on Purim, we read, of course, the Megillah that has the most press, the book of Esther. And what Dr. Eskenazi argues is that the Megillot are stages of life for all of us. Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. We fall in love with a partner. We fall in love with life. We fall in love and we are awakened by that love. And we are awakened with love. Then we get to the book of Ruth. We start building a community. We try to put bread on the table. And we also see the challenges. We see how difficult it can be to build a home and create a community. Eicha, Tisha B'Av, Lamentations. Everything you've built falls apart. Betrayal, death, illness. Everything you've counted on for your future evaporates. Then we get to Sukkot, the book of Kohelet. Now that I've watched everything fall apart, what does it all mean? And how do I put it back together? What's the point of it all? Those are the central questions that Kohelet asks, that Ecclesiastes asks. And Esther, these are Dr. Eskenazi's words, not my own. Esther, it's just a nice book for the winter season. So a little bit of historical framework. Yes, Tamar Eskenazi is her name. A little bit of historical framework. The book of Ruth is ascribed to the 2nd century BCE. It's interpreted as a narrative that comes as a counter to some of the separatist trends that were happening at the time. Yes, Steve.
Well, Esther, the Hebrew people are saved, so they have a chance to start all over again. Otherwise, it's all over.
Yeah. Good. So the interpretive of this narrative that comes as a counter to separatist trends that were happening in the 2nd century BCE. So one question that we have to ask ourselves, and by the way, I will admit for this first part, I'm going to gloss over a lot of these questions just because I want them to be in your mind, but we're not going to dive into them because my goal is that we can cover one chapter of this book each week that we study together. I see some of you from Torah study laughing because if we get through 3 chapters in a usual Torah study that lasts longer than this session, it's a good day, but we're going to try. Someone found it important to relate this story of a unique woman who is at the tail end, is a progenitor of the David line. So when we get to the end of chapter 4, we're going to see that Ruth, it's a straight line from Ruth all the way to King David. And so we have to ask ourselves, why did someone think it was so important to relate this story of Ruth to the Davidic line? There's a little bit of a different, the laws that are described and how they're played out are a little bit different than the Deuteronomic laws. And the way that the rabbis in the Mishnah reconcile this idea is, again, I'm not saying I agree with the tradition. My job as a rabbi is just to teach the tradition, warts and all. The Mishnah reconciles this idea by saying, it's a woman, the laws were different. Fantastic. So the institution of conversion and ritual conversion starts in the era of the 5th century BCE, so about 300 years earlier. And one thing that we have to resolve is that there are some differences between the Ezra Nehemiah model and Ruth. So the institution of conversion is a compromise between the separatists and the universalists. Today, you can kind of think of those as today's assimilation versus particularism debate. And by the 2nd century BCE, conversion is a known institution. Of course, extremists don't like compromise, and the proof in the pudding is how the center is held. And that's what we're going to see. The book is a partial attempt at making levirate marriage, which is described in Deuteronomy, which levirate marriage is the brother of a deceased man is obligated to marry his brother's widow. Some argue that this book is an attempt to make levirate marriage a national law. It's described in Deuteronomy, but this concretizes it. The rabbinic authorship ascribes this book to Samuel. And some things I want you to be thinking about as we go through: who are the Ruths of our community? Who are the Naomis of our community? Who are the Ruths of the community, and who are the Naomis? There's another thing just to keep in mind. Pay attention to how blessings come to be fulfilled in this book. You ask for them, then you take some action. It doesn't come from above. And that's a big shift. That you ask for a blessing, you do some action, and it may or may not be God intervening. People bless each other, but for the blessings to come to fruition, people take action. In this story, people become the agents of blessing, which is something that I'm sure that we all resonate with today. People are the agents of blessing. So, let's begin. We're going to begin Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the chieftains ruled, in other words, once upon a time, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And his 2 sons were Machlon and Chilion. Ephratim of Bethlehem in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there. So far, not so bad. We're setting it up. Then we get the scene from Up, the first 10 minutes of Up. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other, ta-da, Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. Okay, some time has passed. Then those 2, Machlon and Chilion, also died. This is not a good start to the story. So the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. By the way, who is the woman that we're talking about here? Who are we talking about?
Naomi.
Naomi, good. Now, something to keep in mind. What have we not encountered yet in this story? Who have we not encountered, I should say?
God.
God. We don't know where God is yet. But what's clear from the beginning of this story is that this is a human-focused story right off the bat. Now we can imagine where Naomi is at this point in her life emotionally. Nancy.
Actually, they
I'm sorry,
had left.
Nancy, I just unmuted you. Start what you were saying again.
Okay. That there was some questioning from years that I had heard years ago, the questioning that how come, yes, there was a famine in the land, but they also left the land of Judaism or Israel, and they went to a foreign land, which actually sets up the story in a whole different context.
Absolutely. So it's important to note exactly that point, which is to say that they're in the wilderness. They are they're out of their normal routine. Their lives have been turned upside down, and a couple of notes to frame this scene that we've seen so far. Why would you go to the desert if there's a famine? If there's a famine, you would think that the desert would be the furthest place you'd want to go to. And you're absolutely right, Nancy, that's a question. And the reason why we get this idea of in the time when the chieftains ruled, which is to say that people were doing their own thing. It was a crazy time. The rabbis, of course, ask, why is there a famine? It's also important to note the names of Naomi's children, Machlon and Chilion. Machlon comes from forgiveness. Chilion from finish. In verse 4, the verb to marry that's used here is a post-exilic term. It's not the same term that's used in earlier books. It means to lift up, usually in reference to marriage to non-Jews. So we have a lot of textual conversation that's happening here between the Ruth era and the Ezra Nehemiah era. Jane.
Yeah. Are we supposed to make any connection between the start of this story and the start of the Joseph story? I mean,
good. What do you
going
think?
Down to Egypt because there was a famine.
That's a fantastic connection. What do you think?
I think yes, because both of these are times when things change, when things are in transition, and because people going from one place to another. I mean, it's the story of our people, but in this case, it all looked benign to start with, except for the famine, and yet then Ruth becomes a vulnerable person when all the men who could be there to protect her were not there anymore. So
Good.
Joseph also seemed vulnerable, and somehow something good came of it.
Absolutely. Good. So in this commentary, it mentions the word to reside from verse 1, lagur, to sojourn, that is, reside temporarily. As in the ancestral stories in Genesis, those who leave Israel because of famine do not intend to settle abroad permanently. And we get these examples. So yes, there is that connection being made, but it's also this understanding that their sojourning, is a temporary thing. Gamze Yavor, this too shall pass. This famine will pass. This COVID-19, God willing, will pass. Okay. Let's continue on. Verse 6. She started out with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. What does that mean? How it relates to the famine?
The famine had lifted. They were
The famine's over. Something changed, and they're able to return. For in the country of Moab, she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. Accompanied by her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and they set out on the road back to the land of Judah. For Naomi, life is with a husband. Ruth subverts this notion. She helps Naomi understand that and see that life is possible beyond. That it's possible to affirm that you can have life with a husband, and you can also have life without. In verse 7, she is on her way back, but they are not. Accompanied by her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and they set out on the road back to the land of Judah. Now, starting at verse 8, and for the next 10 verses, are 10 of my favorite verses in the entire book.
Ooh.
We're going to go through them. I'm going to try to make a case. You may or may not agree with me, and that's okay. But I promise there's a light at the end of this tunnel. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Turn back, each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me." It doesn't come through in the translation, but there's a switch between masculine and feminine pronouns here. In other words, don't go back to your mother-in-law's home. Go back to your mother's home. There's possible some sarcasm going on here, that may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. Naomi, I'm guessing, is not so thrilled with God. God has not given her kindness when it deals with everybody that has died around her. And what's clear from this is Naomi's in bad shape emotionally. She's heartbroken. Verse 9, may the Lord grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband. And she kissed them farewell. And they broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." 11. But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you?" You can sense she's twisting the knife with more sarcasm. Oi, gewalt. Haven't you taken enough from me? You entered my life, and my sons are dead. 12. Turn back, my daughters, for I am too old to be married. Okay. This is an interesting shift. So far, Naomi has focused externally. This is really the first time where we see Naomi getting into it a little bit herself. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you, on their account, debar yourselves from marriage? Oh no, my daughters. My lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me. There is intense bitterness here. The hand of the Lord has struck out against me. Surely we all have faced moments where we have felt that the hand of God has struck out against us. dealing with any kind of destruction, of loss, of death, of illness. 14. They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. This is a big moment. This is usually the moment where most people start kind of paying attention to the story. Here we see two paths diverging. Orpah says, I'm going to take you at your word. See you later. But Ruth clung to her. Ruth says, you're family. We're in this together. So she said, see your sister and see who's the she here is Naomi. See, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law. But Ruth replied, and here's the part we know. Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her, and the two went out until they reached Bethlehem.
Yeah, what a beautiful declaration of love. Yeah.
So Nancy, I'm very curious because let's dive in. You say it's a beautiful declaration of love.
Of love.
Say more about that.
Well, I mean, this is, there's a feeling here that there was a sort of a protocol that when you were in a certain culture, that you were expected to follow the lines of the culture, especially for the women, because they didn't have priority. The men had priority.
Sure.
And the women did not have the choice. But when you say, I will be with you no matter what, because you are important to me, our relationship is what really counts. That's really going beyond culture. I mean, that's really, when you talk about pure love, to me, that represents pure love.
Good. Other thoughts? So that end of 19, that end, or the beginning of the end of this part of the story, and the beginning of verse 19, and the two went on until they reached Bethlehem. Does that remind you of anything else? Jump in if it does.
Yeah, that reminds me of Abraham and Isaac. The two went on.
Very good, very good. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs actually argues that Ruth is a female counterpoint of Abraham. They are both called to set out on a journey. Genesis is a prelude to the birth of the Jewish people. Genesis is a book about family. Ruth is a prelude to the birth of a kingdom. And the argument is, don't try to build a political system without the values of love and understanding and compassion underpinning it.
And loyalty.
And loyalty. Well, loyalty, perhaps. Let's go back just a little bit to starting at verse 16, the famous verse. And I have to bring up my notes in another way. Yeah. And one of the things that you should notice, that I hope you notice, is, well, I guess I should ask, is this a conversion? Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. Is she converting here?
Is that, has the religion itself been established by this time?
Good point. We don't know. Religion as we know it today, no. But is this a sufficient conversion?
But there's the earlier place where it says, see, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. And so contrast to, I will lodge, wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God.
Good.
So we're talking about two different systems here. And so she has made the declaration that she will adhere to this God. And so.
Good.
It's a beautiful statement. It's
yeah.
very
Sally and Joe and Sally.
Can't hear you.
Stage before conversion.
Wait, Joe, start again.
Okay. Conversion sounds a little bit more like ritual, where here it could be just simply adoption. Maybe more preliminary approach.
Good. Good. Eric.
Yeah, I think it's a declaration which can be viewed as a conversion, a rudimentary conversion. I mean, I think that the actual process doesn't come about until in the Talmud and Yevamot, where you get the stipulation, or the question that the rabbis asked the person converting, why do you want to do this? I mean, are you crazy? I mean,
good.
It's here you're joining a people that have been besieged and murdered and whatever, and so you're waiting for the reply. Yes, I still want to do that. I'm aware of everything that's befallen the Jews, and I still want to do it. So at the time of the book of Ruth, you didn't have that, the rabbis around to come up with these rules that the Talmud does.
Of course. By the way, fun fact, nowhere in the halakha and the Jewish codes does it say that a rabbi is supposed to send away a potential convert 3 times. It is a bastardization of Naomi's actions here. A bastardization of an interpretation of Naomi's actions here. The theory is that Naomi sends Ruth away 3 times, and therefore we should deny someone 3 times. What the codes do say is exactly what Eric said, which is if a potential convert comes to you, a rabbi's job, or comes to a rabbi, the rabbi's job is to say, but don't you know how hard it is to be a Jew? That's the response. Steve, and then Mary, and then Jane.
Well, first, I think we should be careful using the word conversion as we understand it today. I would call this a conversion because there was no formality then, but she's clearly adopting the Hebrew God.
Right.
As far as modern conversion, yeah, the rabbi is supposed to turn him away 3 times, and I think Mary's going to chime in on something with this. But actually, the conversion is not a conversion unless the community accepts the person desiring to convert. So it's one thing for the rabbi to turn him away 3 times, but then you have to have the Beit Din in today's world, and it's the Beit Din in the community that accepts the convert. Otherwise, there's no conversion.
Good.
But what Ruth has done is as good a conversion as you could expect in a time without formality.
Good. Good. Mary and then Jane.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I had a problem with my mic before. So yes, I was turned away 3 times, and nobody had warned me why I was being put off by the rabbi, but I understood eventually. And yes, I was asked why in the heck I wanted to join with all the trouble. And yes, as Steve says, it was made clear to me that it was the community accepting me. So just sharing the personal story, having been through all that.
Mm.
But also, she didn't know that she had to ask 3 times.
Oh.
If somebody didn't finally tell her after the second, I still wouldn't have a Jewish wife.
There you go. Well, I'm so sorry that happened, Mary.
Okay.
It's Bert, not Jane. This seems to me much more like a very strong personal attraction than a conversion.
Good.
Whither thou go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. I will stay with you until one of us dies, and I will be buried there. That doesn't sound like her mind is primarily on religion. I also want to go back to where she says, go to your mother's house.
Yes.
Seems to me that every place else in religious writing, it's your father's house.
Yes, I'm so glad you noted that.
Good point.
Mother's house is also referenced in Song of Songs. Little that I had passed them until I found that which I love with my whole being. I held him and would not leave him until I bring him to my mother's house and into my mother's room. After this episode, curiously enough, Ruth is still referred to as Ruth the Moabite.
Mm.
And in 2:10, which we'll study together next week, she's actually going to refer to herself as a foreigner. So Bert, I interpret this the same way that you do. The phrase that I use is that this is not a statement of conversion. It is a statement of love, but at its core, this is a statement of alliance. This is Ruth saying, I am going to ally myself with you, your people, your culture, and be a support to you. Now, why does she need to be a support? We're going to come back to that right after we get to Rob.
Right, so I was thinking along the lines that Bert just expressed, but maybe even a little bit more stronger. To me, it's just 2 individuals. One has the self-confidence to go back to where they were, has no support, and willing to start over, more like Abraham, the land I will show you, but off with no security, versus staying with a known entity. Yes, this woman is aging, but there's that comfort level, even if they are going to go forward. So I don't see the conversion issue approaching at this point either. But to me, it's just that the 2 individuals, who is secure in themselves and who, I'm not quite ready to go off by myself yet.
Good. Steve.
I just heard 3 men leave out God, leave out the key phrase, your God shall be my God. Hey, why?
so again, if you're going to stay with somebody because you need that security, you're willing to adopt or adapt to whatever their needs are also. And if their needs are this God that I have now lived with more or less for the 10 years, I can deal with that. It's not
Well,
that important to me. It's that I need to go ahead and be able to just support myself. And I don't feel comfortable going off my own.
Following Naomi's God for those 10 years. She's making a statement now, clearly.
Nancy.
Yeah, I'm listening to the conversation, and what I keep coming up with, that there's something that's very, very powerful here. And to me, what's so powerful, it's not a question of conversion or what practice she's going to be following. It's a question of, she really loves Naomi, and she cares about Naomi, and she cares about the family, that whatever the family heritage was that she will be bringing forward. And to me, that's a very personal statement, which says more than the organizational aspect.
Awesome. Nancy, that was a fantastic transition, and I really appreciate it, because
You're welcome.
I would like to posit in our last 10 minutes together that in this scene, these brief 10 verses, that Ruth actually helps support Naomi as she goes through the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. And here's how. Naomi's first attempt is to send away, which we might describe as denial or numbness. She uses the word return, shuvna. Naomi blesses Ruth and Orpah. Ruth and Orpah respond with crying and a statement of alliance. Naomi's second attempt to send away focuses on her anger and depression. Naomi implores a return, shuvna. Harsh rhetorical questions, sarcastic rhetorical questions. Naomi's bitterness reveals itself, showing her pain. Ruth and Orpah's responses differ. Both women sob. Orpah kisses Naomi goodbye. Ruth clings. Naomi's third attempt to send away gets a little bit into bargaining. Naomi begs Ruth to return, shuvi, like Orpah returned, shava. Ruth turns up the intensity, articulating her full alliance to Naomi. And eventually, Naomi finds acceptance in Ruth's companionship.
Perseverance.
Yeah.
And caring, I suppose.
Absolutely. The caring, I'm so glad you brought that word in, Nancy. One of the key words for this entire book is this word chesed, loving kindness, compassion. That's at the core of the book of Ruth, is chesed. And Ruth embodies that. Understanding, I mean, look at the difference between the way that Orpah and Ruth react to Naomi. In modern day life, we might say that Ruth has a higher emotional intelligence than Orpah does. Orpah says, okay, you've said goodbye to me twice. I'm going to take the hint. See you later. Ruth is able to see, no. That's not what this is about. This is just grief rearing its ugly head. And I'm going to stay with you through that grief. How does that idea resonate with you? And by the way, if you want to challenge it, by all means, go nuts. I am not the kind of rabbi who says, this is how the text says it. This is one interpretation. So I welcome the dialogue.
No, I think it's truly loving kindness.
I don't follow the stages of grief here. Could you go through that quickly again, please?
Sure, sure. In verses 8 to 10, Naomi's first attempt to send away is revealing her denial and numbness.
Mm-hmm.
The second attempt to send away reveal in 11 to 14 reveals anger and depression. That's when she starts to get sarcastic.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a moment of sobbing, which may be a little bit of perhaps it's just the daughters-in-law that are sobbing. But nevertheless, there's this moment of allowing emotions to be shown. They broke into weeping again. And the they there, once more the women respond with tears. They are overcome with emotion and saying nothing. The narrator speaks for them, describing laconically what is a pivotal turning point in the story of the three women. Two go back to Judah, one goes back to Moab. And then in the third attempt to send away, it's like Ruth has kind of not worn her down, but because Orpah has gone through these stages, there's more bargaining that's happening. And in 18, we finally get to a moment of acceptance. Now, what I have learned about these 5 stages is that they are not always sequential. Fortunately, it does follow this pattern. Fortunately, for the sake of this argument, it does follow sequentially. But Rabbi John Stein, I remember when I was dealing with a loss, and he shared with me that these stages don't go sequentially, but rather they come sometimes together. You get multiples together. Sometimes you get none. Sometimes you get all of them at once. And it can come in waves. You'll have a moment of acceptance, which will lead to a moment of anger, which will lead to a moment of denial, which will engage a moment of bargaining and acceptance.
I think we can all say we experienced those feelings.
Yeah.
Times in our lives.
And what's amazing is Ruth's response to it all. Surely each of us, when we've had those moments of grief, that there has been someone who has just sat with us or been with us in some way to help get us through. And oftentimes it's the best thing they do is in offering that that care is just being a presence. Let's continue on so we can finish the chapter. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?" There's a comment here. It says, "It's not possible to ascertain the tone of this question. The women could be astonished that Naomi has returned, delighted to see her, incredulous that this woman could really be Naomi, given how she's changed, or all of the above. According to a commentator, Al-Sheikh, age and the suffering she endured so changed Naomi as to make her almost unrecognizable." Verse 20, "Do not call me Naomi," she replied. "Call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter." Mar is the Hebrew word for bitter. She's taking on a bitter name. "I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me?" Thus Naomi By the way, the narrator does not care that she has changed her name. And if the narrator does care, they're choosing to not follow her wishes, which is fascinating. We'll keep that in mind as we go through, and let's see if anybody else actually calls her Mara or if they call her Naomi. Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabite. Okay.
Moabite, yeah.
Moabite. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And that, friends, is why we read this book on Shavuot. Because there's a reference to the barley harvest. So that's the simple reading. That's the simple meaning for why we read this on Shavuot, because Shavuot is the beginning of the barley harvest.
Does Naomi mean anything?
Probably, but I haven't done the research on it. Eric and Louise.
I find it interesting that Ruth is referred to as a Moabite at the end of the chapter, even though she's gone through this process of declaring her loyalty to Ruth's God. And another way of saying that she converted, if we're going to accept that.
Good.
And because as you know, someone who does go through the conversion, the Talmud is saying, you are a Jew. Your whole history, your whole background is now Jewish. You are, the daughter of Sarah. You are the daughter of Abraham, or in this case, or the son. But the story of in the book of Ruth is that no, you're still a Moabite, and we don't really, or we're not really that accepting of Ruth as a true convert.
Good. Luis, yeah. You're muted.
Sorry. About Naomi changing her name to Mara, and then the narrator not really caring about the change of name, but continuing to call him. But it reminds me of Jacob and Israel. He was called the two different names for no special reason, it seems to me. So maybe this is just part of that same, I don't know what.
Good. I'm really glad you brought that up. By the way, the thing that Louise is referring to, we actually have two scenes in Genesis where Jacob's name gets changed. Jacob wrestles with the angel, the Ish Elohim, the man of God. Mm-hmm. And in the blessing, Jacob's name is changed. And in the next chapter, we're back to Jacob. So we get another name change. And then from there on after, we get Israel. But you're right that the text is, well, maybe that has something to teach us then. Perhaps that name changes can only come from a ritual transformation or some other transformation, not a proclaimed name change, which leads into a whole host of other complications. I see a couple of hands. Feel free to jump in. Actually, Maxine,
Jews have a it's sort of like having name changes. I mean, there's this custom of if you want to get some good luck, you change your name.
Good.
Or that God won't know that you've been sick and He'll make you well. Or there's all this.
Oh yeah.
Naming changes.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes, there's an Ashkenazi custom that if you get diagnosed with a terminal illness, you should change your name, because when the angel of death comes for you, they're going to be like, "I'm looking for Albert," and I'm not Albert, I'm John. Oh, okay. The superstitions in Jewish tradition are fascinating. By the way, Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews don't and do name their children after living or non-living relatives for the same reason. Ashkenazi Jews don't name after living relatives because they don't want the angel of death to come down and take the wrong one by accident. Sephardic Jews do name after living relatives because when the angel of death comes, they'll get so confused that they'll just take nobody. God, I love our tradition. Louise, and then we'll wrap up.
Real quick, they use the name Shaddai for God here. I wonder why, rather than any of the other ones that we know.
Good. This is the first time we get Shaddai. I do have a note on this. So this is a relatively uncommon name for God in the Hebrew Bible, El Shaddai. It appears as a name for God only 48 times in our Hebrew Bible. Compare that with 6,800 instances of Yud Hey Vav Hey. 31 of them in Job and 6 in Genesis. Of Shaddai, by the way. Since Naomi regularly uses God's more common name, Yud Hey Vav Hey, her choice here must convey something specific. This term is nearly the same as the word meaning breasts when inflected as my breasts. According to a number of scholars, it might have referred originally to an ancient divinity associated with mountains. If so, the name became absorbed into Israel's religion as another name for Israel's unique god, Yud Hey Vav Hey, but the etymology may be less significant in Naomi's outcry than the associations that the name invokes. In Genesis, it's often associated with fertility, when Jacob's blessing of Joseph refers to Shaddai, who blesses you, and continues with blessings of the breast and womb. These associations may be especially appropriate for Naomi, who is no longer fertile and who has lost her children. Okay. Next week, we're going to continue on. One of the things that I love about doing classes like this, and especially learning with each of you, is that if I can just speak about my own personal experience of why I'm a rabbi. I remember learning that the book of Jonah does not end when the fish spits Jonah back out. There are 2 more chapters after that. So too, in this book of Ruth, do we get more story after this statement of alliance, statement of love, statement of conversion, however you see it. There's so much more to this book than just the first chapter. And I'm so excited that we get to study it together. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for being here, Rabbi.
It's my honor. It's my honor.
Rabbi.
And we'll talk soon.
Good to
Bye,
see
everyone.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.